The house was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that wrapped itself around you, making every small noise feel magnified. Sarah, a 17-year-old girl with long brown hair and a nervous habit of biting her nails, stood in the doorway of her family's living room. She watched her parents' car disappear down the long, winding driveway, leaving only the echo of their departure behind. It wasn't the first time Sarah had been left alone. Her parents trusted her, and she relished these rare weekends of independence. No rules, no noise, just peace. She locked the door, double-checking it, and then made her way to the kitchen to grab a snack. The fluorescent light buzzed softly as she rummaged through the fridge. She pulled out a soda and a leftover slice of pizza, humming to herself. The clock on the microwave read 8:45 p.m. She had the whole night ahead: movies, snacks, maybe some reading. A perfect night. But as she settled onto the couch, remote in hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than usual. She brushed it off. Just your imagination, she told herself. The first movie began to play, filling the room with flickering light and sound. An old horror classic, something she'd seen a dozen times before. But tonight, every creak and whisper in the house felt amplified. The wind outside howled, and the branches of the old oak tree scraped against the window. Suddenly, there was a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. Sarah muted the TV, straining to hear. Nothing. The house was still. She laughed nervously. Get a grip, Sarah. But as she unmuted the TV, there it was again. A faint whisper, coming from the hallway. Hello. She called, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. Sarah stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. The whisper had been faint, almost like the rustling of paper, but it was enough to make her uneasy. She glanced down the hallway, where the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. The shadows danced on the walls, cast by the dim light from the living room. Maybe it's just the wind, she murmured, trying to convince herself. She walked slowly toward the hallway, each step echoing on the wooden floor. As she reached the entrance, the whisper came again, clearer this time. It was like a soft breath, a wordless murmur that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Is someone there? She called, her voice trembling. Silence. She took a deep breath and turned on the hallway light. It flickered once before steadying, casting a warm glow over the old family photos lining the walls. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She shook her head and turned back to the living room. It's just your imagination, she repeated to herself, trying to suppress the growing sense of dread. As she settled back on the couch, the air in the room grew colder. The TV flickered, the screen turning to static for a brief moment before returning to the movie. Sarah frowned, reaching for the remote. The static returned, louder this time, filling the room with a harsh, grating noise. She turned off the TV, but the static sound continued, echoing through the house. Stop it. She yelled, covering her ears. Suddenly, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat frozen, her eyes wide with fear. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. They were coming from upstairs. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking. No signal. The Wi-Fi icon showed a weak connection, but the internet was down. She tried to call her parents, but the call wouldn't go through. Please, not now, she whispered. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. Each creak of the old wood echoed through the house. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to hide. She ran to the kitchen, crouching behind the island, her breath shallow and quick. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. They stopped. Silence. Sarah peered around the corner, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure whoever or whatever was in the house could hear it. The living room was empty. Then, the whisper came again, right behind her ear. She spun around, but there was nothing there. The air was cold, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. Who's there? She cried, her voice barely audible. The lights in the kitchen flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her phone's flashlight, turning it on. The small beam cut through the darkness, but it felt like the shadows were pressing in around her. She moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the silence. Suddenly, she saw a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, shadowy, and unmoving. It was just standing there, watching her. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The figure took a step forward, its movement slow and deliberate. "Stay away!" she shouted, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It took another step, and then another, its form becoming clearer. It was like a shadow given shape, featureless but menacing. Sarah backed away, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She turned and ran toward the back door, but as she reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Locked. She fumbled with the latch, but it was like the door had fused shut. "Please!" she cried, pounding on the wood. She turned around. The figure was closer now, standing in the middle of the living room. It didn't move, but she could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive. Suddenly, the figure vanished. The room was empty again. Sarah's heart was racing. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she had to get out. She ran to the front door, but it was the same, locked, unmovable. The whisper came again, louder this time. It seemed to come from all around her, the words unintelligible but filled with malice. "Why are you doing this?" she screamed. The lights flickered back on, and she saw it words scratched into the wall, deep and jagged.